Thomas Aldridge was 43 years old when his Visa card declined at a gas station on a Tuesday morning, and the woman behind the counter looked at him with the particular patience reserved for people who do not know yet that something has gone wrong. He tried the second card. It declined too. He stood at the pump in a gray thermal shirt and worn chinos with $40 in cash in his wallet, which he used, and drove to work without stopping again. He did not call the bank from the parking lot. He did not call his wife. He pulled his sight notebook from the glove box, reviewed the day's appointments, and walked into the building he had been walking into for 11 years as if nothing had interrupted the morning. Because in his experience, the best way to understand what had just happened was to think clearly. And thinking clearly required not reacting before you had complete information. For 14 years before that Tuesday, Thomas Aldridge had been a man who did not require much to be satisfied. He had built Aldridge Capital Analytics from a two-person research consultancy and a sublet office in downtown Columbus into a firm that advised institutional investors across 6 states on portfolio risk and fixed income strategy. He drove a 2017 Subaru Outback with a long scrape along the passenger door from a parking garage pillar he had misjudged 3 years ago. He brought lunch most days in an insulated bag his daughter Camille had bought him for Father's Day the year she was 11. He wore the same 3 rotation of blazers to client meetings and had never once thought to add a 4th. He had told his wife Renata, when she mentioned this once, that the clients were not paying him for his jacket. She had laughed at that. That was before the laughing stopped. He had also, over a period of 22 years, quietly and methodically accumulated 4.3% of the outstanding common shares of First Meridian Bancorp, a regional bank headquartered in Columbus, with $9.4 billion in assets, through a private holding structure his attorney had established when Thomas was 26 years old at the direction of a mentor who had told him that the most important financial decision a man could make was the one nobody saw him making. The shares had never been discussed at dinner. They had never appeared on a tax document Renata had reviewed. They were held in the Aldridge Family Trust, administered by an attorney named Gerald Kaufman, and they were worth, as of the most recent quarterly statement, $41 million. Renata had called the bank on a Monday afternoon and reported the joint account debit cards as lost. She had no idea whose bank she had just called. What happened next would take her the rest of her life to fully reckon with. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. Thomas did not need it anymore. He had not needed an alarm in years. His body had simply decided that 5:28 was when the day started. And so the alarm had become a formality, a small daily confirmation that things were where they were supposed to be. He shut it off. He lay still for 11 seconds. He listened to the house. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial on Bexley's east side that he had bought during the firm's 5th year, when the revenue had grown stable enough that the purchase felt responsible rather than aspirational. It needed a new roof, which he had been pricing. The gutter on the northwest corner dripped in heavy rain, which he had been meaning to address since August. These were not crises. These were items on a list. And lists were managed in order of priority, and the roof came before the gutter, and both of them could wait until the spring pricing cycle when contractor rates came down. He dressed in the dark. Canvas pants, thermal shirt, the brown leather belt he had owned for 9 years and intended to own for 9 more. He went downstairs. The kitchen was the room he had spent the most time in on weekends over the past 3 years. Not because he enjoyed cooking particularly, but because it was the room where Camille came to find him. She was 14 now, and she moved through the house in the particular way of teenagers who are already becoming themselves, with a self-possession and directness that Thomas recognized as his own in a younger form. She found him in the kitchen because she knew that was where he was, and she sat on the counter while he made things, and they talked about whatever she was thinking about, which was usually something specific and worth the time. He made the coffee. He sliced a banana into the oatmeal and waited for it to thicken. He looked out the kitchen window at the October yard. The oak in the back corner had turned fully, amber and copper, and the light was not yet up, but the sky was moving from black toward the gray that preceded it. He heard Renata before she appeared, the specific sound of her, the precise heel strike of her boots on the hardwood, the rustle of the good coat she wore to the office. She had been a commercial loan officer at a regional lending institution for 7 years, and she dressed for the job with the deliberateness of someone who understood that appearance was a professional tool. She was good at her work. She had a gift for reading the financial position of a business from the documents in front of her, and from the posture of the person presenting them. And she had closed deals in the past 2 years that her manager had described, in Thomas's presence at a company dinner, as the kind of deals that made careers. She came into the kitchen without greeting him, poured herself coffee from what he had made, and looked at her phone with the focused attention that had become, over the past year or so, her primary mode in any room they shared. At some point in the past 18 months, conversation had become something that happened to them occasionally rather than something they did. He had noticed it the way he noticed financial trends, not with alarm, but with the patient attention of someone tracking a line that was moving in a direction worth watching. She mentioned Craig Sutton twice in the next 5 minutes, which was not unusual. Craig Sutton was a commercial real estate developer who was one of her bank's significant clients and who had become, over the past year, a recurring presence in her professional conversation. Thomas had met him once at a bank function and had found him pleasant and well-dressed and precisely the kind of man who understood the value of other people's money. His portfolio valuation came in higher than expected, Renata said, to her phone as much as to Thomas. He's in a good position going into Q1. Good for him, Thomas said. She looked up from her phone long enough to take in his oatmeal and his thermos and his brown belt. You have client meetings today? She said. Lakewood Capital at 10, he said. Portfolio review. She nodded. Not at him. At the information. Try to be home by 7, she said. I have a dinner tonight. He said he would try. She finished her coffee and went to the garage. Thomas looked at the kitchen window for a moment. Then he picked up his site notebook and his thermos and his lunch bag and went to work. Aldridge Capital Analytics occupied the 3rd floor of a building on East Broad Street that Thomas had leased for 8 years. His team was small and deliberately so. 4 senior analysts, 2 junior researchers, a compliance officer, and an office manager named Patricia, who had been with the firm since year 2. And who maintained the operational infrastructure of the company with a precision that matched his own. He trusted all of them completely. He had hired each one specifically. The Lakewood Capital Review ran 2 hours. Lakewood was a family office that had been with the firm for 6 years, and the principal, a woman named Sandra Forsyth, who had inherited a manufacturing business, sold it at 61, and proceeded to spend the past decade demonstrating that she understood capital allocation better than most professionals Thomas had encountered. Asked the kind of questions that required complete answers. He gave them. He had prepared for the meeting the way he prepared for all meetings, thoroughly, in advance, without gaps. He drove back to the office afterward and was reviewing the afternoon's analysis queue when Patricia appeared at his door and said there was a Gerald Kaufman on the line. Gerald Kaufman called him quarterly. Occasionally he called in between quarters when something warranted it. Thomas picked up. I've had a call from First Meridian's investor relations, Gerald said. He was a methodical man, Gerald, and he had been Thomas's attorney for 19 years. They've flagged an unusual inquiry. Someone called the retail banking division last week and attempted to get information on the accounts associated with the trust. The representative followed protocol, no disclosure, but they noted it and forwarded it to investor relations per our standing instruction. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What kind of inquiry?" he said. The caller gave your name and date of birth. They asked about account balances and whether there were any outstanding investment holdings associated with the account. Gerald paused. The representative confirmed nothing, as instructed. But they described the caller as, and I'm reading directly, persistent and specific in their questioning. Thomas looked at the wall of his office. Outside the window, East Broad was moving through its Tuesday morning routine. "Thank you, Gerald," he said. "Do you want me to flag it with the compliance team?" "Not yet," Thomas said. "Let me understand what I'm looking at first." He put the phone down. He sat for a long moment. He opened the bottom left drawer of his desk and took out a folder he had been building for 6 weeks. Since the first time he had noticed the home equity line of credit inquiry on his credit monitoring alert. An inquiry made without his knowledge or consent, in his name, for a figure large enough to require a moment of stillness before he could look at it neutrally. The folder held 4 documents. He added a 5th, a handwritten note with today's date and Gerald's summary. Then he picked up the phone and called an attorney named David Osai, whose name had been given to him 3 years ago by a client who had described him as the only person in Columbus he would want in his corner if things ever became serious. David Osai had been a litigator for 17 years before he shifted his practice to high-asset family law and financial dispute resolution. His office was on the 14th floor of a building on High Street. His wall held a single-framed document, his bar certification, and nothing else. He was 51 years old and had the particular quality of absolute stillness in conversation that Thomas recognized and respected immediately. Thomas laid out everything in 40 minutes, methodically, starting from the credit inquiry 6 weeks ago and moving forward through the home equity application, the card cancellations that morning, and Gerald's call about the trust inquiry. David listened without writing anything down. When Thomas finished, David said, "How does she know about the trust?" "I don't believe she does," Thomas said. "I believe she knows I have more than she can see, and she's trying to find the boundary." "The card cancellation is a direct action," David said. "Reporting your cards as lost is, at minimum, financial manipulation during what I would characterize, given everything else you've described, as a pre-separation period. Is she working with an attorney?" "I don't know," Thomas said. "She will be," David said. "Given the credit inquiry, the home equity application, and the bank inquiry, she is building a picture of your financial position before she moves. The problem for her is that the picture she's building is missing its most important element." "The trust," Thomas said. "The trust," David said. $41 million in a properly structured separate property trust is not a marital asset under Ohio law. Your interest in First Meridian Bancorp is not hers to claim regardless of the length of the marriage, provided the trust documentation is clean. He paused. "Is it clean?" "Gerald has administered it since the formation," Thomas said. "It has never commingled with marital funds. Not once." David looked at him. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. Based on what you have described, your wife's financial position in any dissolution proceeding is far less advantageous than she currently believes it to be. She has been attempting to map your assets using retail banking channels and credit tools. She does not know she has been calling the bank whose largest individual non-institutional shareholder is the man sitting across from me." Thomas looked at the single-framed certificate on David's wall. "What do I do now?" he said. You do exactly what you've been doing, David said. Nothing that changes the pattern. Nothing that signals you've moved. He picked up his pen. And you let me start building. He replaced the declined cards with cash for the week and said nothing to Renata about the cancellation. She said nothing to him. The silence was the kind that only exists between two people who are both holding information and have decided separately not to be the one who releases it first. He understood this dynamic well. He had seen it in client negotiations. He knew that the party who spoke first was almost always the one who needed something. He did not need anything except time. David Osei called him the following Thursday with the name of the attorney Renata had retained, a family law practitioner named Susan Hartwell who had offices in the short north and a reputation. David told him without editorializing for aggressive front-end financial discovery. Susan Hartwell's strategy in high-asset cases was to establish the full scope of a spouse's holdings before filing, so that the filing itself could be structured around a comprehensive asset claim. She's going to have a comprehensive claim, David said. She's just going to have the wrong number. How far off? Thomas said. Based on what retail banking shows, the joint accounts, the business income, the real property, her picture of you is probably in the 3 to 5 million range. David paused. She has no mechanism to find the trust through standard discovery channels unless we disclose it. Which we will, Thomas said. At the appropriate moment, David said. Yes. He called his brother Leon that weekend. Leon was 4 years younger and ran a landscaping business in Westerville and had been Thomas's closest confidant for all of his adult life. He had the specific quality of receiving difficult information without drama and then asking the most useful question available. Thomas told him everything. The cards, the credit inquiries, the trust inquiry, the attorneys. Leon was quiet for a moment after Thomas finished. She doesn't know about the shares, Leon said. No. How long have you been buying in? 22 years, Thomas said. Leon thought about that. She's been at that bank for 7 years, Leon said slowly. I know, Thomas said. She processes loan applications for commercial clients of a bank whose largest single non-institutional shareholder is her husband. I know, Thomas said. And she called that bank to cancel your cards. A pause. Yes, Thomas said. Leon laughed. Not unkindly, the laugh of a man encountering a situation so complete in its irony that there is nothing else to do with it. Thomas, he said. I know, Thomas said. I'm not saying this is funny, it is a little, Thomas said. They were both quiet for a moment. What do you need me to do? Leon said. I need someone Camille trusts to be available when this becomes real for her, Thomas said. She's going to need adults around her who are not falling apart. I'll come over Sunday, Leon said. I'll bring the girls. We'll make it a normal day. That's what I need, Thomas said. Thomas, Leon said, before he hung up. 22 years. You just kept buying in, quiet as anything, and she's at that bank every day, and she never knew. She never asked, Thomas said. Nobody asks the right questions, Leon said. That's always the mistake. Nobody asks the right questions. He called Evelyn Aldridge on Sunday evening. His mother was 67 and had been widowed at 53 when Thomas's father, a postal worker who had invested carefully for 31 years in accounts no one had asked him about, left behind an estate that had surprised everyone in the family except Thomas, who had been watching and learning. Evelyn was living in a house in Clintonville that she owned outright and gardened with the focused attention she applied to everything. She listened to the full account without interruption. When he finished, she said, "Your father would say, the tree you planted is the tree you're climbing." Thomas said. That sounds like him. He also would say the other person always underestimates the quiet ones, she said. They see quiet and they think empty. They're always wrong about that. She paused. Camille knows something is wrong, she said. Children always know. You should talk to her before she has to figure it out herself. I know, Thomas said. She's strong, Evelyn said. She has your father in her. She'll be all right. He talked to Camille on a Monday evening when Renata was at a dinner function that ran late. They sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea. She had started drinking tea at 13, and he had adjusted, without comment, the way he adjusted to things that made sense. And he told her, plainly and without softening it into something unrecognizable, that he and her mother were having serious problems, and that it was possible things were going to change. She looked at him across the kitchen table. She was 14, and she processed things the way he did, completely before responding. Is it the thing with Craig Sutton? She said. Thomas looked at her. I heard a phone call, she said. I wasn't trying to. I just heard it. He held his cup. I don't know exactly what it is, he said, which was honest enough. Camille looked at the table for a moment. Are you going to be okay? She said. Yes, he said. Are you sure? I am absolutely certain, he said. She nodded. She believed him the way she had always believed him, which was completely and without qualification, because he had not once in her 14 years given her a reason not to. Okay, she said. And she meant it. David Osei filed on a Wednesday morning in December, 4 weeks after Thomas had replaced the canceled cards, and 6 weeks after the first call to Gerald Kaufman. The filing was a comprehensive dissolution petition that included a full asset disclosure, the joint accounts, the business equity, the real property, and, in a separately tabbed exhibit prepared by Gerald and reviewed 3 times for accuracy, the complete documentation of the Aldridge Family Trust and its 4.3% holding in First Meridian Bancorp, valued at $41 million as of the filing date. David had wanted to wait for Renata's filing so they could respond. Thomas had said he preferred to move first. David had said, why? Thomas had said, because the whole strategy so far has been to build a map of my position before I can establish it on my own terms. If we file first and we file complete, we take the map away from her. David had said, that is exactly right. The filing landed in Susan Hartwell's inbox at 9:47 a.m. David told Thomas later that Susan Hartwell had called his office at 11:15 and used the word comprehensive 3 times in the first 90 seconds of the conversation. David had said he was glad she found it thorough. She had asked for time to review the trust documentation. He had given her a week. Renata called Thomas at noon. He was eating lunch at his desk. The lunch from the insulated bag Camille had given him for Father's Day. A sandwich and an apple and a thermos of the coffee he had made that morning at 5:30 a.m. He looked at the phone. He let it go to voicemail. He ate his lunch. He listened to the voicemail at 1 o'clock. Her voice on the message was a voice he had not heard from her before. Not angry, not composed, not the professional confidence that she moved through the world in. It was smaller. It was the voice of someone standing in a room that had turned out to be much larger than the room they thought they had walked into. She said she thought they should talk. He called David Osei. Let Susan Hartwell call me, David said. That's the right channel. Thomas said that was fine. He put the phone down. He opened the afternoon's analysis queue and went back to work. The discovery phase ran 6 weeks. Susan Hartwell's team examined the trust documentation with the thoroughness that a $41 million surprise demanded. They brought in a forensic accountant. They reviewed 22 years of trust records, every share purchase, every dividend reinvestment, every quarterly statement, looking for evidence of commingling with marital funds that would allow them to claim the trust as a partially marital asset. They found nothing. Because there was nothing. The trust had been maintained with the same precision that Thomas applied to everything, which was total and without exception. Gerald Kaufman sat through 4 hours of deposition with the forensic accountant and answered every question in the specific, unhurried language of a man who has administered a clean document for 19 years and has nothing to explain except the facts, which were sufficient. David received Susan Hartwell's revised asset position 3 weeks before the mediation date. He called. "Thomas, she's withdrawing the home equity claim," David said. "The equity line application made in your name without your consent is a problem for her. It constitutes financial misconduct under Ohio statute, and her attorney knows it." He paused. "She's also withdrawing any claim on the trust. The documentation is, as you said, clean. What does she want?" Thomas said. "Equitable split of the joint marital assets," David said. "The house, the joint accounts, her retirement contributions matched. And she's requesting spousal support. Based on what income gap?" Thomas said. "Based on the firm's revenue," David said. "She has no mechanism to reach the trust for support calculations. The trust income is not marital income. The support calculation is based on your salary draw from the firm, which is deliberate?" "Deliberate," Thomas said. "I've taken the same salary for 8 years. The firm's growth doesn't show in my draw." "So the support calculation she's requesting," David said, "is based on a salary draw from a firm that represents approximately 4% of your net worth." Thomas said nothing. "Her attorney knows this is not optimal," David said. "But she doesn't have a better instrument. The trust is separate. The shares are separate. The only thing she can touch is the marital estate. And the marital estate is, compared to what we disclosed, relatively modest." "What's the equitable split number?" Thomas said. David gave him a figure. Thomas wrote it down. "Counter at the standard split," Thomas said. "I'll keep the house for Camille's stability and buy her out at fair value. The joint accounts split evenly. Retirement matched. Spousal support at the statutory minimum for 3 years based on the salary draw." He paused. "And I want it settled before the new year." "That's a reasonable counter," David said. "I know," Thomas said. "Make sure she knows I'm not going to move very far from it." The mediation took place on a Thursday morning in January in a conference room on the 12th floor of a building on Gay Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked north over the city. Thomas arrived at 8:55 in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. He set his legal pad and his mechanical pencil at his place. He looked at the room once and sat down. Renata arrived with Susan Hartwell at 9:02. She was dressed as she always dressed for professional contexts, carefully, intentionally, with a composure that had been her default setting for all the years he had known her. But something underneath the composure had changed its load-bearing structure. She sat across the table, and she looked at him. And he recognized in her face the expression he had been expecting since December. The particular look of someone who has spent 6 weeks examining a document they did not know existed, and understanding, 1 page at a time, what they did not know about the person sitting across from them. The mediator walked through the framework. David had prepared the counter, and it was exactly what Thomas had said. Fair market buyout of the marital home, equal split of joint accounts, retirement matching, 3 years of spousal support at statutory minimums derived from the salary draw. Clean, specific, not generous, but not unkind. Susan Hartwell conferred with Renata for 20 minutes. When they came back, she said her client was prepared to accept the framework with one modification. The spousal support term extended to 5 years instead of 3. David looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Renata across the pale birch table. He said, 4 years. Susan Hartwell said she would discuss it. They went to recess. Thomas stood at the window and looked at Columbus in January. Flat, gray, the city moving through its morning with practiced efficiency. He drank water from the credenza. He thought about Camille's expression at the kitchen table and the tea she had started making for herself at 13, and the way she had said, "Are you sure?" And the way he had said, "Absolutely certain," and meant it down to the structure of the thing. They came back in. Susan Hartwell said 4 years was acceptable. The documents were signed at 11:47. Thomas straightened his chair. He picked up his legal pad and his mechanical pencil. He looked at Renata once across the table, not with warmth, not with cruelty, with the clean regard of a man who is finished with something and knows it fully. He said, "I hope things go well for you." He stood. He put on his coat. He took the elevator down through the quiet building and walked out onto Gay Street, where January was cold and precise, and went back to the office. He had an afternoon review session with his senior analyst team at 2. He did not want to be late. The marital estate settled in February. Renata received her equitable half of the joint accounts, which came to $63,000. She received the retirement matching, which came to $41,000. She received 4 years of spousal support at the calculated monthly rate, which David had described as the number that comes out when you run the statutory formula on a deliberate salary draw. She received nothing from the trust. She received nothing from the shares. She had called the bank, whose largest individual non-institutional shareholder was her husband, and canceled his cards. She received $63,000 and a modest monthly check. She moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in the short north. It was a good neighborhood, and the apartment was well appointed, and she could afford it comfortably on her income, which was solid. And Thomas had never contested that. She was good at her work. She had always been good at her work. The problem was not her ability. The problem was a picture she had built and lived inside for 14 years, and never once thought to take down and examine from the back, where the structure was visible. Craig Sutton's development projects, which had been expanding through the tail end of the previous year, encountered a credit contraction in Q1 of the following year that tightened his financing and required 2 of his planned acquisitions to be delayed indefinitely. Renata had worked on the loan portfolio that supported those acquisitions. The delayed projects were not her fault and did not affect her employment, but they affected the basis on which certain assurances had been made in certain private conversations, and those assurances, quietly, became less relevant to the parties who had given them. Thomas heard this through Gerald Kaufman, who heard it through First Meridian's commercial banking division, of which Thomas was, as of the most recent quarterly report, still the largest individual non-institutional shareholder. He noted it. He filed it. He moved on. He kept the house on Bexley's east side for Camille. He replaced the roof in April at a price he had negotiated in February, when the contractor rates came down, exactly as planned. He fixed the gutter on the northwest corner himself on a Saturday morning in May, which took 40 minutes and a tube of waterproof sealant and was not worth hiring out. He priced the work correctly. He always priced the work correctly. He bought the brown belt's replacement in March. Same style, same leather, from the same company. Because he had found something that worked and saw no reason to change it. He put 4,000 miles on the Outback's replacement, a used Subaru of the same model year and a different color, before the end of spring. He did not mention the trust to anyone who did not already know about it. He had not mentioned it for 22 years. He saw no reason to start. First Meridian's annual shareholder meeting was held in June in a conference center in downtown Columbus. Thomas attended, as he attended every year. He sat in the 14th row on the left side with his sight notebook and his mechanical pencil. He listened to the board's presentation on the year's performance, the loan growth, the deposit base, the net interest margin, the capital adequacy ratios. He wrote the numbers that mattered in his notebook. He asked one question during the shareholder Q&A, a technical question about the bank's fixed income duration exposure in a rising rate environment, which the chief risk officer answered in full. The man sitting next to him introduced himself during the break as a retail investor from Ghana, who had held 200 shares for 12 years and said it was the best dividend in his portfolio. Thomas said he was glad to hear it. The man asked what Thomas held. Thomas said he had been a long-term holder. The man said the bank was a good company to hold long-term. Thomas said he agreed. He drove home in the used Outback in the June afternoon with the windows down because the air was warm and clean, and the city was doing what cities do in early summer, exhaling. Finally, after a long winter, he picked Camille up from her end-of-year soccer banquet at 6:15. She got in the car with her trophy and her cleats and the particular ease of a 15-year-old who had had a good day and knew it. "How was the meeting?" she said. "Informative," he said. "Is the bank doing well?" He looked at her. "The bank is doing very well," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and looked out the window at the passing street. He drove. The city moved around them. The evening came on slow and warm. He had work tomorrow, and the day after that, and the roof was done, and the gutter was fixed, and the brown belt's replacement was broken in just right, and there was absolutely nothing behind him worth looking back at. He turned onto their street. He drove the length of it at the same pace he always drove it, and he pulled into the driveway of the house where everything that mattered was waiting, and he turned the engine off. He sat for one moment in the quiet. Then he got out. He went inside. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.